A witch can, so I can, because I am a witch.
Of the witches? What does that make me, Prince Valiant?
This is no joking matter.
You're not kidding.
Not many people know why Bewitched went off the air. In its right, the show was a success, keeping families fixed to their screens every time it aired. However, it was taken off and thrown in the trash after 8 seasons, and people still wonder why. The show first premiered on September 17, 1964, and even today, it's still loved by fans. Over the years, there were several spin-offs, but none of them ever quite captured the magic of the original. Join us in this video as we unravel the details about the infamous scene that took Bewitched off the air. You never knew this. The reason Bewitched was probably taken off air. There's a deeply emotional story tied to one of the characters on the show, Larry Tate, that might have led to the end of the show. On Bewitched, when Larry and Louise Tate had a son, actor David White, who played Larry, asked that the baby be named Jonathan. This wasn't random. In real life, White had a son named Jonathan, whom he raised as a single father after his wife tragically died during pregnancy complications. The show's creators were moved by the request and agreed immediately, naming the character after his real-life son as a heartfelt tribute. But what followed was heartbreaking. In 1988, David White's son, Jonathan, was taken out in the explosion of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. Just 2 years later, White himself passed away from a heart attack. Today, they are buried side by side at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Stories like this led many people to believe that the Bewitched cast was somehow cursed, especially since several cast members died relatively young. On a lighter note, the actress who played Tabitha had quite an interesting life after the show. She continued acting, appearing in popular series like Lassie, and also did numerous commercials and even some modeling work. She auditioned alongside rising stars like Helen Hunt and Jodie Foster, but eventually her family chose to step away from the spotlight. They moved to Orange County so she could have a more normal teenage life, and she really embraced it. She even became her high school's homecoming queen before moving on to the next phase of her life. As for Samantha's magic, well, it wasn't as effortless as it looked. Back in the 1960s, long before CGI made everything easy, creating those magical effects took real work. It involved practical tricks, clever editing, and a whole team of stagehands working behind the scenes to bring each spell to life. To create Samantha's magic, Elizabeth Montgomery often had to stand perfectly still with her arms raised while the director called "cut." The moment filming paused, stagehands would rush onto the set, quickly moving props or adjusting objects to make it seem like things had magically changed. It wasn't high-tech, especially by today's standards, but it worked. It was fast, cost-effective, and helped bring the show's magic to life in a believable way. They weren't easy on her physically either. Because there was no CGI, Montgomery often had to keep her arms raised and perfectly still for long stretches during filming. It might have looked effortless on screen, but behind the scenes, it took real discipline, and probably a bit of endurance too. Because everything had to be done manually, Elizabeth Montgomery had to stay completely still during those magic scenes. She would hold her arms in the exact same position while the director called "cut," and everyone else moved around her, adjusting props, resetting the scene, and creating the illusion of magic. Only when the director called "action" again was she allowed to move and continue the scene. It might have looked simple on screen, but it required a lot of patience and control. As for why Bewitched ended, the real reason is surprisingly simple. Its star was ready to move on. Was it such an easy thing to do? What might have influenced such decisions? Keep watching to find out. Bewitched, the real reason they left. Before the show even began, Elizabeth Montgomery had considered stepping away from acting. It was her husband at the time, Bill Asher, who was also a producer, who convinced her to take on the role. After 8 seasons, the network was eager to keep the show going. In fact, it had already been renewed for seasons 9 and 10, but Montgomery had reached her limit. She was simply done. Around that same time, her marriage to Asher was beginning to fall apart. The show officially ended in 1972, and the couple divorced a year later. Off-screen, Montgomery wasn't exactly the sweet, polished figure many viewers imagined. According to Erin Murphy, who played Tabitha, she actually had a bold and playful personality. In a 2017 interview, Murphy described her as someone with a mischievous sense of humor, completely unafraid to be silly or even a little outrageous. She had that rare mix of elegance and humor. She could look stunning one moment and completely let loose the next, very much in the spirit of classic comedic performers like Lucille Ball. She was known to be a very private person, rarely sharing personal details like her age. When she died, it was widely reported that she was 57 years old. But in reality, she was actually 62, a detail that only came to light later, adding one final layer of mystery to her life. Even after her passing, there were still a few surprising inaccuracies about Elizabeth Montgomery. Because she chose to keep her personal life private, many people didn't even know she had married Robert Foxworth. As a result, several obituaries incorrectly listed her as single. There were other inconsistencies too. Her age was misreported, and even her death certificate had an error. It listed her name as Elizabeth A. Montgomery. But longtime fans know her real middle name was Victoria, not Anne. It just goes to show how private she remained, despite living so much of her life in the public eye. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere on Bewitched reflected a very different era in Hollywood. In the 1960s, alcohol was treated much more casually than it is today. On modern sets, strict union rules typically prohibit drinking while working, but back then, things were a bit more relaxed. However, when children were on set, the rules were tighter. Actors were often instructed to use substitutes, like iced tea, to mimic alcoholic drinks during filming. Interestingly, Dick Wilson, who often played a drunk character on the show, became known for those performances, even though what he was drinking on set wasn't actually alcohol. And here's a surprising twist. Elizabeth Montgomery almost didn't play Samantha at all. The show's creator, Sol Sachs, originally had another actress in mind, Tammy Grimes. In fact, the character wasn't even going to be called Samantha at first. The original name was Cassandra. Sachs believed Grimes had a natural elegance that fit the role. But as things turned out, the casting changed, and television history was made with Montgomery in the lead. In the end, Sol Sachs and Bill Asher decided to cast Elizabeth Montgomery as Samantha, and it's hard to imagine anyone else fitting the role so perfectly. She brought a charm and presence that truly defined the character. The original idea for the lead character wasn't even Samantha. She was meant to be named Cassandra, and the role was first offered to Tammy Grimes. However, she remained under contract with Screen Gems and was unable to take the part. As the project evolved, the character was renamed Samantha, and Montgomery was ultimately cast as the lead, setting the stage for the success that followed. Although the show turned out to be a short-lived success, what were some of the most unforgettable moments in the show? Let's see. The beginning. For starters, the show didn't just come out of nowhere. 2 films inspired it: I Married a Witch and Belle, Book and Candle. The creator, Sol Sachs, actually built the pilot episode using elements from both movies. He later said he wasn't worried about any legal trouble because both films were owned by Columbia Pictures, the same company connected to Screen Gems, which produced Bewitched. So everything stayed in-house. Then there's Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Samantha. She was incredibly beautiful in the 1960s and stayed that way for years. You'd almost think she had her own anti-aging spell. In reality, she likely just took great care of herself, eating well and staying active. But what many people didn't know was that, behind the scenes, she was dealing with health issues that were kept very private. And here's another interesting twist. Richard Sargent almost played Darren Stevens. He was very close to landing the role early on, but while the show was still trying to cast Samantha, he ended up taking another job and missed his chance. We'll probably never know how things might have turned out if Richard Crenna had seriously taken the role, or how different Bewitched could have been with another actor playing Darren. Now, here's something a lot of people don't realize. Elizabeth Montgomery didn't just play Samantha. She actually took on multiple roles throughout the show. She played Samantha's mischievous cousin Serena, and even appeared as herself at times. Interestingly, when she played Serena, she wasn't credited under her real name. Instead, she used the alias Pandora Spox. Her look and personality would shift depending on the character, especially when Serena showed up alongside Samantha or other family members, like Cousin York. The casting of Darren Stevens had its own twists too. Richard Sargent initially passed on the role, which then went to Richard Crenna, but he also turned it down after The Real McCoys. That's how Dick York eventually got the part. Later on, Sargent would return to step into the role, but by then, things had already started to change for the show. For years, Dick York's departure wasn't clearly explained, which led to a lot of speculation. One of the most common rumors was that he struggled with an addiction to pain medication. The story goes back to an injury he suffered while filming They Came to Cordura, where he severely damaged muscles on the right side of his back. He was prescribed painkillers, and over time, that became a serious, long-term issue that affected his ability to keep filming. Things took a dramatic turn during season 5. One day, during a lunch break, York visited a doctor and was given a vitamin B12 shot, but he had a severe reaction. He ended up having a seizure right there on set and had to be rushed to the hospital. After that, he never returned to the show. For a few episodes, Bewitched went on without Darren, until Dick Sargent eventually stepped in to take over the role. It was one of the few rough patches for what was otherwise a very well-loved show. You know how every great show comes with its chaotic behind the scenes. What was it like for the cast and crew of Bewitched? Keep watching to find out. Behind the scenes of Bewitched. Behind the scenes, Elizabeth Montgomery's real life was also shaping the story. During the run of Bewitched, she was pregnant 3 times. Her first child was born in July 1964. Instead of hiding her pregnancies, which is what Hollywood often did at the time, using camera tricks and clever angles, the producers chose a different path. They actually wrote 2 of her pregnancies into the show, introducing Tabitha and Adam into the Stevens family. That decision wasn't always popular, though. Adding children to a series could change its dynamic, and many shows try to avoid it altogether. Then there's Dick York, who played Darren Stevens, the mortal husband of Samantha. His charm and comedic timing became a huge part of what made the character so memorable. But after Bewitched ended, York didn't take on many more roles. Given his ongoing health struggles, that wasn't too surprising to fans. Another emotional moment tied to the show came with actress Bernadette Withers, who played the ever-curious neighbor Gladys Kravitz. Just 2 months after her death, she was awarded a posthumous Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress. While posthumous awards aren't unusual, what made this situation different was that she had kept her illness a secret, not just from the public, but from her fellow cast members and even the show's producers. Her passing came as a complete shock, especially since the series had only just begun at the time. And like many shows of that era, Bewitched also had to work within tight budgets. In television back then, it was standard practice to cut costs wherever possible, even for successful or long-running series. Even with its growing popularity, the show still had to be mindful of costs. But in a way, that worked out. It gave supporting cast members the freedom to bring their own unique flair into their roles. Take Agnes Moorehead, for example. She often wore a stunning starburst brooch, set with about 8.5 carats of old mine-cut diamonds. It was a piece Elizabeth Montgomery absolutely admired. When Moorehead passed away in 1974, she left that cherished brooch to Montgomery, a quiet but deeply touching gesture that reflected their close bond. Off-camera, real friendships were forming, even amid tension. Despite rumors about Dick York's struggles with painkiller addiction, Moorhead didn't want to see him leave the show. She truly respected his work. However, things weren't always smooth. It's said that she and Dick Sargent didn't get along very well, with occasional disagreements that created tension on set. Moorhead had clearly preferred York in the role of Darren, and his replacement by Sargent didn't sit well with her. But interestingly, that tension may have had an unexpected upside. During those difficult moments, Elizabeth Montgomery and Dick Sargent grew closer. Supporting each other through the challenges of filming helped them build a friendship that lasted a lifetime. And then there's Aunt Clara, one of the most lovable and quirky characters on the show. What many people don't know is that her fascination with doorknobs wasn't entirely fictional. The actress behind her, Marion Lorne, actually had a real-life obsession with collecting them. She owned over 1,000 antique doorknobs. It might sound unusual at first, but collectors today would understand that those kinds of items can be surprisingly valuable and highly sought after. What else made the show intriguing and a masterpiece? How did the show do when it aired? Let's see. A successful run. What people think about Bewitched. Walter Metz attributes the success of Bewitched to several key factors. Its sharp, witty writing, the charm and presence of Elizabeth Montgomery, and the strong performances of its large supporting cast. The show also stood out for its use of respected film techniques to create its special effects, which were quite innovative for the time. Its soundtrack was another unique element, especially the distinctive synthesized sound used for Samantha's iconic nose twitch. In the earliest episodes, the show even featured a voiceover narrator who offered humorous, almost sociological commentary on the role of a witch living in middle-class suburbia. This style echoed earlier Hollywood films like Will Success, Spoil Rock Hunter, 1957. In a 1991 audio interview with film historian Ronald Haver, Elizabeth Montgomery shared an interesting behind-the-scenes detail. Her father, Robert Montgomery, was originally approached to provide the narration for the series. However, he declined the offer. The role ultimately went to Academy Award-winning actor Jose Ferrer, who performed the narration uncredited. The success of Bewitched also helped inspire a competing series, I Dream of Jeannie, which aired on NBC from 1965 to 1970. Interestingly, both shows were produced by the same studio, Screen Gems. Decades later, the show's legacy was still being celebrated. On June 15, 2005, TV Land unveiled a statue of Samantha in Salem to commemorate the show's 40th anniversary. Present at the event were several surviving cast members, including Bernard Fox, who played Dr. Bombay, Erin Murphy, who played Tabitha, and Casey Rogers, Louise Tate, along with producer and director William Asher. Together, these moments highlight just how enduring Bewitched has been, not just as a television series, but as a cultural landmark. Another fun detail comes from the neighborhood set itself. The lot, famously known as Blondie Street, named after the classic Blondie and Dagwood Bumstead series, had been in use for decades. Over roughly 50 years, it appeared in numerous television shows and films set in different time periods. For example, during the run of Bewitched, the same neighborhood set was also used for the Partridge Family. That means both shows shared the same physical house on screen at the same time. Even Gladys Kravitz's home and the Partridge Family residence were essentially the same structure, styled differently for each production. The house itself was a modest two-story home with a white picket fence. That fence remained in place for years before eventually being removed in 1999, with bay windows later replacing the original front design. During the Bewitched years, the front of the house also looked quite different. A photo from around the year 2000 shows how the exterior had evolved over time. If you were facing the Partridge house, the home next door to the right was actually used in Dream of Jeannie as the residence of Major Nelson and Jeannie. There's even more overlap between productions. When the Partridge Family was being filmed, about 3 feet of Jeannie's front yard had to be removed to widen the driveway and make space for the iconic bus used in the show. That area has since been restored to its original layout. In one storyline, Darren becomes frustrated with Samantha for using her magic too freely and worries she might expose herself as a witch. He insists they should tell everyone the truth. Samantha then dreams that Darren goes public with his abilities. However, that episode was interrupted during its original broadcast to announce the sad passing of Martin Luther King Jr., a moment that overshadowed the episode entirely. What do you think about the masterpiece in Bewitched? Do you think the show might have continued somehow? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us as we unraveled the magic Bewitched brought to screens. We hope you found this video both reminiscing and interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more interesting facts. See you there.